Good morning, everyone. It is such an honor to be here with you today, to be invited to have a very important conversation. I want to thank you that you have taken this Saturday to come together with like-minded people. You're investing your time, and I hope that this investment is well worth your time. And, I want to emphasize with this title, Bold Leadership Moves That Transform Student Outcomes. Leadership is not about position and title. It is about disposition. And the greatest leaders we have out there are those teachers, those of you who are on the front line, as Dr. Odegaard said, doing the real work, transforming the family tree through literacy. And I just want to stop, acknowledge, and celebrate you. And if you have said, I'm just a teacher, I want this to be the day that you change that and you don't say, I'm just a teacher, but you speak to the power of your profession and that you are a transformational change agent. You are just as important as a doctor, as a lawyer, as the professions we typically celebrate. Those professions wouldn't exist without you. And I think we can all agree that central to the challenge that we are all facing across this country, not just in the state of Tennessee, it is that this is an equity issue. Literacy is about equity and access, and it is about reading being a human right for every scholar, regardless of the neighborhood they come from, the dialect and the language they're lugged in. Access to the 21st century knowledge economy is tied directly to literacy. That I have the term, it's a form of currency or exchange, where you have a place at the table in an information age. There was something that happened some time ago that I found to be pretty analogous to what I'm experiencing right here in the city of Houston, where I hail from. I have the privilege of serving as president and CEO of NIHouse Education Center, a nonprofit focused on the mission of reading success for all. We've been around for 42 years, and over the past 6 years, we have grown because we recognize that we have a first instruction problem. We're going to talk about that more later. We are a nationally accredited organization to prepare dyslexia therapists to meet the needs of students with dyslexia. However, we recognize that when we get first instruction right and we work at preventing reading failure, we're so much more powerful in terms of identifying children who are on the spectrum and serving them as well. Sometimes it's dyslexia. As I learned in my own journey as an educator and a teacher, I had a bit of dysteachia. I left a university program ill-equipped to meet the needs of my students. And so I have an opportunity to admire the problem or to be a change agent and take my power back from those experiences and pay forward what I have learned on my journey. And as you heard, I want to look at this from a systems perspective, because as I heard from a very astute superintendent we worked with in the Valley here in Texas, first you have to plan the work and then you work the plan. This is about change management. And so back in the day, you may have parents, or you may have been around to hear the famous words uttered by Jim Lavelle. Houston, we have a problem, when he called mission control. The outcome? Well, first of all, a little backstory. It was actually Jack Swigert who made the initial call to mission control, but it was Jim whose voice was recorded on that famous recording. The Apollo 13 crew had to get back home. And just like them, we have children who need to be able to find their place of safety, of purpose, and potential. It took teamwork to make that dream work. It took creativity based on the science they knew. It took a little electrical power, and they were able to safely splash down on April 18th. I see so many parallels to their perilous journey. We are at a crucial crossroad and juncture. We do have a literacy crisis, and I am sounding the alarm. And I know you are doing the same in your realm of influence. Without a title, you have the power to influence from the middle. The smoke providing evidence that this is a crisis. I want to take a look at this from the lens of adult literacy across our country. What if we backloaded from what we can learn about adults and how they are faring today? Because they are the products of a system that needs to change. And to think about it from that perspective to shape our efforts on the front end of the children we're serving today. And we can determine that we will exploit this pandemic because it's actually given us permission, if we take our power back, to reinvent, to retool, to rethink how we're going to tackle this challenge in a way that is achievable, because there are lighthouse districts, lighthouse schools, and lighthouse universities who have accepted responsibility not to react, but to be responsive to this crisis and to take authority over what they know works and change systems so that they serve children well. Again, are we preparing children for a knowledge economy and an information age? I do want to touch briefly on NAEP scores, because one of the things we know from the National Assessment for Educational Progress is that it lifts out of the political posturing that we see associated with state tests, where proficiency may mean passing half of the questions on a test. And what does that really tell us about preparing our children for a knowledge economy? That's something that's very important to think about. Think about your state and think about formative assessment versus the summative assessment state by state. The rigor of those tests are quite variable, and NAEP allows us to look across, kind of cut across all of that noise to see how our children are faring. And what we know when we look at the National Assessment for Educational Progress is that we have a critical mass of children performing below proficiency. And that test also assesses private school students. You see, this is something we can all wrap our arms around as a crisis that will lift the nation through literacy. As you can see, when we look across the past decade or so, it's pretty much a flat line. We do not see dramatic growth occurring yet. When the critical mass of systems in this country, starting with universities, apprenticing teachers in what is proven practice, and leaders. Because when I left my program with the idea of becoming a superintendent one day, I can tell you, I was not prepared to responsibly scale the most important work we do in schools, and that is ensuring children leave literate for a lifetime. That should be the centerpiece of any leadership program, in my opinion. Whether we're preparing you to be a principal, whether we're preparing you to be a superintendent, this is where the transformation must begin. And we will see a change on NAEP when we deal with that root issue. We also need to think about, when we look at fourth grade cut scores on NAEP, how are we faring when it comes to children who are assessed on average, are we growing or are we losing ground year by year by year? I anticipate, because we did see a dip, that we will see another dip that is part of the COVID effect. So we need to have a sense of urgency in terms of pushing back against that moving forward as we think about the home state of Tennessee and how you are faring in terms of NAEP. We are either going to be victims or we're going to choose to be victorious when we understand the crisis, the challenge, and the problem. Let's think about when we're talking about non-eligible and eligible students for free and reduced lunch. One of the battlegrounds we cannot ignore, even when we have solid first instruction, is that children are experiencing barriers to learning due to poverty. But poverty is not a life sentence for children when they become literate. It is a war zone they must navigate, but when we give them the currency of literacy, they have a gateway to hope and to promise. We're going to talk more about that. Most certainly, we don't want to have a low classism and racism of low expectations for our scholars. That's unacceptable, because I can tell you, we are working, as I mentioned, in the Valley, where we are working with EL learners and leaders who are determined to do the right work, Appalachia, across the state of Alabama. We see the same double-digit growth regardless of student group, regardless of poverty, when we plan the work and we work the plan. So this is a long game. This is not the short game. This is not a Band-Aid. It's not about a program. Yes, Nye House Education Center has programs for Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. But this is about building teacher knowledge and building leader knowledge so that they can serve as diagnostic prescriptive practitioners, treated with the honor and respect that they deserve. And so when we think about other barriers and challenges, let's think about children with disabilities. Once again, we see a dynamic gap between the children who are edging towards proficient and those who are not. One of the common things I'm seeing nationally is that special education teachers have not been honored to know how to work with their scholars and teach reading based upon evidence, based upon structured literacy that is proven to move the needle with their children. They deserve the respect as they're serving their students to navigate this war zone of illiteracy with success, with the armor they need to win for their children on a daily basis. We're talking about systems alignment here, which you're going to hear about more later, and we cannot leave anything to chance. This requires a literacy safety net so no child falls through the cracks. When we look by student group, we see a gap that exists when you look at how white students fare, Black students fare in the system, and Hispanic students fare in the system. Now, I wish I could dissect this data even more, because I'm sure, like my children, I have 3 amazing children who are highly literate. And part of that is based upon my experiences, because I see literacy as a form of privilege. And you better be sure I transfer that privilege to my children. And so we don't want to be too simplistic about this challenge. Yes, we want to be accountable by student group, but we cannot ignore how race and class intersect. And where my students struggled, I was able to afford tutoring. I wasn't dependent upon the system my children were learning in. I was able to provide additional supports, but not every parent can do that. let's say dyslexia services, for example. Do I have to choose between groceries and therapy? That's why getting this right at all tiers is something that leaders can do, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. I'm going to go through, keep moving along here because I think I've made the point about NAEP and what we can gather from that. Back to the idea of the canary in the mine. Let's think about adults and how they're faring. I don't know if you're aware of this, but recently there was research funded by the Barbara Bush Foundation looking at adult illiteracy. If adults in our country were able to move up to the equivalent of a 6th grade reading level, the national benefit economically is estimated to be $2 trillion annually. Think about what we could do with $2 trillion annually for education in this country. So effectively, in any system we've worked in to get first instruction right and align those tiers of support for students, money that was spent on intervention services with the wait to fail model was recaptured to focus on even enrichment experiences for children. And so this adult literacy crisis is real. Right here in the city of Houston, where I live, 1 in 3 adults are struggling, this report found, with being functionally literate. And I'm going to give you the example of someone who called me yesterday, one of our adult literacy students, because we repurpose our team and they actually teach adults to learn to read for the first time who could not afford dyslexia services, but we don't turn anyone away. This particular lady has a family where there's a strong dyslexia stream, and we have, I think, 5 members of their family learning to read in our program. She called me, she said, Dr. Wheaton, she said, I'm learning to read, but I want to learn to speak like you. I want to learn to be an ambassador so I can share what a difference this has made in my life. And I almost wept because what she was saying really is there's a dialect variation, a language variation I've been loved in, but I realized to be taken seriously, I need to be able not only to read in the language of power, but to speak in the language of power, to express my ideas in the language of power, because that is the currency that drives the economy in our country. And I made her a promise to figure out how we could achieve that goal for her. And I told her, you have currency you can build upon. And I honor your request, because to have a place at the table, it is not just about reading. It's reading plus, it's writing. It's so much more. But we've got to get reading right to move on to the next. There is a demographer I highly regard. I recommend his book, Dr. Stephen Kleinberg. His book, The Prophetic City, Houston on the Cusp of a Changing America, made this statement in his book. By 2050, all of America will look like Houston does today, and we are the most diverse city in the country. It is a safe statement to make that if Houston's Latino and Black young people are unprepared to succeed in the global knowledge economy of the 21st century, it is difficult, if not impossible, to envision a prosperous vision for Houston. And I want to add, it's not just about, again, the student group a child comes from. It is hard to be poor in this country, whether you're poor and white, poor and Black, poor and Latino. Poverty is our common enemy. He states that the source of wealth for Houston in the 21st century will have to do with attracting the best and brightest people in America working on the cutting edge of knowledge. The resource of the knowledge economy is housed between the ears of the best and brightest people in America who can live anywhere. And the pandemic has proven this like nothing I've ever seen before. The people who suffered the least in terms of economic opportunity are the most literate people. Think about it. they had a place at the table virtually. And we can't access digital currency if we can't access literacy as a currency. And so it is the door that opens the future to the 21st century. I want to take a look at this from another perspective. So picturing students becoming those young adults, again, that backloading from what they're going to be facing. Lexile measures are a readability measure that I find to be a useful way of helping scholars understand and adults understand the challenge in front of them and why there needs to be this commitment, this urgency, focus around becoming literate. We think about just accessing high school textbooks. This is the common denominator, and that the whiskers show that there's a range for high school textbooks in terms of the readability and the rigor of those texts. But as you will see, the through line is the 1300 that goes across so many of the opportunities for access. For my family, that opportunity was the military in some cases. This tests can be a door opener, but what if I am illiterate? This is no longer then an opportunity or a gateway to the future for me. And your placement and opportunities within the military will be based upon how you fall within these whiskers, if you even make it into this category. Citizenship. Our democracy depends on getting this right. Having people who can read and think for themselves critically to be able to look through the smoke and mirrors of politics is crucial to our future. And then we know our scholars will have workplace opportunities that are far-ranging. They may have 8 to 10 different jobs in their career. And so the rigor can be as low as 900 Lexile level up to 1600. We want them to have the opportunity regardless of what the opportunity is in front of them, right? If it's a certification pathway, a CTE pathway, at times the text complexity for CTE pathways would be higher than what would be required in a university, community college, etc. And so as we think about this, and we think about even going beyond, you know, I was determined to be the first in my family to earn a doctorate because I just wanted to show that it could be done. And so that gateway has been broken down, and others, a nephew of mine is about to graduate with his doctoral degree. He saw Aunt Tracy could do it. He knows he can do it. So when we think about the future for adults, this complexity, just being able to access text is crucial. And again, beyond that, being able to navigate it with the spoken word and being able to present our ideas, that is the currency that they deserve. And the stakes, my friends, incredibly high. This is a moral imperative. This is an ethical imperative. And we cannot afford to become weary of well-doing, because if we do not faint, we will reap a harvest within our realm of influence if we are sowing well. I want you to note this data that shows we as a country have the highest incarceration rate of any country. And there is direct through line to functional illiteracy and the school to prison pipeline. Just before I started presenting, I got a call from a young man who is, I call him my spiritual son. He happens to be Hispanic, and I met him when I visited a maximum security prison in Houston 11 years ago. I spent the day with 60 inmates who were trying to earn a GED because it was tied to their opportunity to be paroled, because recidivism decreases significantly for those who become literate in prison. And this young man has a life sentence. He did the crime, and he asked me after I spoke with them, should I go ahead and finish this, miss? I have a life sentence. And I said, yes, you should, because no one can take education from you. And he did succeed. But as you can see in Tennessee, there is a connection between what has happened for adults in the system, and the moral imperative in front of you that you are pursuing. It is a noble cause, and you are the ones who shut that gate and open up, instead of a pipeline to prison, a pathway to promise. A life sentence and intervention deeply influences the likelihood of a lifetime in prison. When I spent that day with these inmates, again, the adults who give us an idea of the outcomes for the children we're serving today, at least a third of them were diagnosed as dyslexic in prison. A large number, special education students who were warehoused, dropped out, and in my experience, serving as assistant superintendent in the 7th largest district in the country, we found our dropout problem began in middle school. That was where kids started giving up. And the common denominator among all of the groups, white, Black, Hispanic, didn't matter, poverty. Poverty that drains the mind, body, and spirit of people who give up behind bars. And it's set up where it's almost impossible to get out unless you have access to literacy or you have someone with the funding to pay for great representation. So we are preventing that slide by the work we have agreed is highly important to talk about today. You know, it's ironic, but it is a good step that we now have a First Step Act in our country. And that First Step Act is intended to screen inmates for dyslexia and ideally serve them. Check and find out what's happening in your state where that's concerned. But the best first step is to prevent reading failure. And so let's talk more about that point. And to set up that point, I want to quote my friend that I honor, Dr. Odegaard. This point gets at the heart of a barrier standing in the way of parent advocates and the research community establishing common ground. Collectively, we must acknowledge that the most fundamental problem we face is not dyslexia. The most fundamental problem is one that we all share. The majority of children in the US are not proficient readers, and the vast majority of these children struggle with basic reading skills. He's absolutely right. I've traveled from coast to coast and worked with districts from Compton USD to DC public schools. It's the same crisis. But I see points of light that we should be attending to, and that means a multifaceted approach. It means family support, which our nonprofit leans into through a family support office. It means not leaving adults behind, because a literate adult is equipped to transfer that currency or privilege to their children. And it means educators, all hands on deck. And so we are honored to be a part of all three facets of this work. And we're at a juncture we have to decide, am I going to be the butterfly effect? I've called this COVID crisis our COVID chrysalis, an opportunity to reinvent and rethink ourselves. And I think at times we don't realize how powerful we are when we're excellent in our work. As a teacher, being that point of light, others are going to want to know, what are you doing? And they're going to want to have what you have. So let's dig into what that requires and takes. First of all, it takes change management. Admiral Grace Hopper said, the most dangerous phrase in the language is, we've always done it this way. And my question is, how is that working for us? In some cases, it's working well because we're using what's proven. In other cases, we need the courage and the boldness to step into the new. And this piece of research I found to be absolutely accurate out of the University of Chicago Consortium on School Research. It starts with effective leaders. You see, as an assistant superintendent and a dean of instruction, I didn't know what I didn't know. As a classroom teacher, I didn't know what I didn't know. So when we have, number one, a superintendent who understands the nature of the work, of scaling the work of literacy responsibly, When they have a clear strategic vision, they become a force multiplier. And right now I have the privilege of working with 26 superintendents through a case study analysis cohort, where once a month we gather, they bring forward a problem of practice in this Vegas space, and we bring experts to the table so they can unpack the challenge of change management and learn from each other. And so I see this collective will building, and every educator deserves that safe space where they can gather virtually. We don't do this face to face, to talk about what effective leaders do to scale the work of literacy responsibly. Effective leaders can lead effective teachers. And teachers, when they know what the right work is to do, and we don't have time for adult egos and noise among researchers. Let me just say that right now. It's not about you, it's about the kids. And so being respectful, if you have a disagreement, and going behind closed doors and having a respectful conversation with the person you disagree with is the right thing to do. Otherwise, it's just about you and your ego. It's not about the children. They become the collateral damage. And we don't want to confuse and cause our teachers to know who should they listen to. What I would say to you teachers, listen to the voices of reason. Listen to the people who are respectful. Listen to the people who aren't trying to throw other people under the bus publicly. That's ego-driven nonsense. You deserve better. And I think you know who the people of reason are. Look at the people who are not in the cheap seats. They are in the arena. They've rolled their sleeves up and they're doing the work. Nyhouse is doing the work all across this country. I know Dr. Odegaard and his team are doing the work. Barbara Wilson's doing the work. Those are the people you should be listening to, because we can show you results. If they can't show you results, take it with a huge grain of salt and notice how they're presenting their ideas. We need to be respectful. We need to be appropriate in how we're presenting these ideas and making sure it's about the main thing. Keep the main thing the main thing. What's proven? Let's do that. And let's make sure teachers can collaborate about that work. When we get our work right at Tier 1 and we're aligning systems, then we're prepared to involve families, the entire school, building strong relationships with families and communities, and doing this work not to communities, but with communities. Because that's another part of the challenge and opportunity here. Do our community members who represent the EL community, for example, are they at the table? Are we engaging them creatively so they feel invited into the space, not being dictated to with disrespect? Are they being listened to? Are they being heard? And we haven't listened until we can respond back to that person's satisfaction. We've heard their pain, and that we care about that pain, and that we have the desire to lean into that pain and find a solution. Supportive environments, schools that are safe and orderly. And anecdotally, what I have found is that when literacy is orderly, the schools are also safe and orderly. I believe children know when they are winning and teachers know when they are winning. Anecdotally, I see higher teacher retention. I want to dig into that in terms of implementation science. When teachers are equipped to do the right work and win, they don't come to work and say, I want to lose today and not serve children. Teachers want to win. They want to serve children. And then students are supported because teachers are equipped to do what needs to be done in an environment that deals with other barriers to learning for students. Barriers to learning beyond strong classroom instruction. It's the next layer that we need to be moving into. But let's get reading right the first time and be resolved and relentless about that focus. Ambitious instruction. And I'm going to tweak that language. I would say evidence-based instruction. Classes are demanding and engaging, and students are focusing on application of knowledge. Application science is what we need to be focused on. And then, of course, there are next practices. Let's build the body of implementation science and go on to the next great idea or understanding that we can give to our children. As I mentioned before, this is not just about doing work, it's about doing the right work. And this is the enemy. This is the kryptonite of the right work. I will never forget being in the hot seat as a teacher and as a leader. Initiative overload. Does this look familiar to any of you? You see, sometimes we front load so much, we're pushing more on the plate of teachers, and they're going, I don't have room for what I've got. It's too much. It's too much. And we need to be listening to that pain. The number one thing I hear teachers asking for is time, not money. Oh, you all deserve 100,000 a year and more. But if I ruled the world, that's what would be happening. But you're asking for time, and that's fair. But this is the problem. From a leadership perspective, our silo mentality may be getting out of hand. Yes, it's out of hand. You see, when the EL department, when the SPED department, when leadership department, when curriculum instruction all have their priorities and they are not aligned at the campus level, people get overloaded. So the problem is, I find, and the opportunity is to create a cross-purpose design team that's talking to each other. And as part of that practice, there are 3 variables we can address to overcome this silo effect and initiative overload. How are we leveraging time? What is our return on that investment? How are we leveraging talent? How are we organizing our talent, building our talent, preparing our talent? And how are we leveraging funding? Back to Harlingen CISD and what we saw happen in the Valley as we partnered with that district. We mapped these resources together through a cross-purpose design team. That cross-purpose design team had the goal of improving pre-kindergarten scores and then continuing that growth all the way up to 12th grade, because literacy doesn't start with early literacy, friends, right? It's about cross-purpose literacy across the content areas. It is about, in 12th grade, morphological awareness out the kazoo. It should be all the way up. And so we have to start somewhere. And their pre-K was not doing well in this superintendent's opinion. 63% ready for kinder when they finished a year of pre-K. He said, that's not going to cut it. Well, over 3 years, they went from 64% kinder ready to 95% kinder ready. The next year, they went down to 91%. And I bet you can guess what happened. Well-meaning principals took those highly trained, highly coached teachers and moved them to the tested grade. And they started to lose ground. They were paying attention to their data. They were able to make a swift mid-course adjustment and make sure they had systems in place that protected against that. They built a backbone of literacy leaders. Their coaches apprenticed in the science of reading research and how to move it to the application level at the classroom level with their teachers. And the growth is just stunning. They're partnering with their local university. They have a teacher preparation pathway for high school students being apprenticed, and they will be growing their own teachers based on the science of reading research. That is what I'm talking about when we say overcoming the silo effect. The silos exist not within the district, just within the district itself, but also the silo between districts and university programs and the people they're preparing for the work. I refuse to forget where I came from. I'm a recovering high school English teacher, and I also taught theater arts. And I know now some of my students in my theater arts classroom are dyslexic adults today. But do you know they would read those scripts, they would find ways to memorize those lines because this is where they found engagement. Sadly, I had students in my high school English classrooms, and I know I was not meeting their needs. They were dyslexic and unidentified. They were on the spectrum, and I had not been armed to do the right work for them. And these are my children who were also navigating the war zone of poverty. But they showed up and believed that this adult was going to fight for them. And so in this moment, I'm fighting for you on this Saturday morning because you are worthy of that. You are worthy of the fight that it's going to take to continue to push this movement forward for the sake of our children. As part of that, what I deserved as a teacher and something in terms of change management we must build in, and this is the work of Joyce and Showers, is taking our educators beyond theory, and that's leaders and teachers. Because when we have just theoretical support, we see some growth, right? 10%, 5% in terms of implementation science, but classroom application, look at this, 0. What happens when we add demonstration? Oh, we do see a bump in understanding of the concept, the application, but still, we don't see the transfer here. What if we add practice? And all of our professional learning at Nye House Education Center is structured this way. We provide practice as if they're delivering to students. We see a significant bump in understanding and application, but in terms of classroom transfer, 5%. But look what happens in systems where peer coaching is a part of the big picture. And I know that Dr. Odegaard and his team work this way. 95% bump across the board. So if we are planning this work in terms of change management, and we don't have a solid strategy for building that infrastructure of literacy leaders who know how to lean into the right work, we're not planning for sustainability. You see, this work is about baking sustainability into the system so that after you move on, the work continues. This is where the magic happens. This is another question I get often, and that is, we need to be really informed consumers. And we need to know if we are in the midst of having chosen non-structured literacy approaches. So if we have invested in non-structured literacy approaches, my recommendation is that you map your resources, maximize what you can, and then find supplemental curriculum that can fill those gaps. It's going to take time for publishers who are committed to producing curriculum that is aligned to the research, but we can't wait, and the kids certainly can't wait. Our scholars need us to make informed decisions to supplement and fill those gaps that exist. So again, there is a seamless experience for students. It's not an either or, oh, we just keep using the non-structured approach until the next adoption comes up. If my child had cancer and I wanted them to get treatment and I didn't have what I needed, I would go and find it. And I know you would too. And I believe philosophically in treating children the way I would want mine treated. So let's look at this as a treatment that we're going to get to make sure our teachers have what they deserve and the tools are aligned and not left to chance. So this is an all hands on deck moment. And what do I mean by that? Educators get beaten up about not solving all of the problems of the world. And you know what? They shouldn't be, because they can't solve all of the problems of the world. They deserve partners to fill in areas that are also barriers to learning. And that starts with family engagement. You see, this is work we want to do with families. And I highly recommend the work of Dr. Karen Knapp and her framework, because there are evidence-based practices associated with family engagement. I had the pleasure of working with Dr. Knapp some time ago, and I was so impressed to be in the midst of the work in a district in Florida where the faith-based community, the pastors can be hands on deck, the business community can be hands on deck, and most importantly, our families to honor them in this process, to be co-creators of change, and to honor the family funds of knowledge that they bring, and creating those welcoming cultures, because particularly for parents who have PTSD because they failed in schools, the system failed them, the last place they want to come and show up again is a school. We have to put them in a place where they feel safe, they feel cared for and nurtured, they feel heard, and there are proven practices to do that work. They have a summer program. I highly recommend you go and take the workshop, because it was an absolute game changer in terms of the way I looked at family engagement. I'll never forget, as an assistant superintendent, I was visiting a campus, and a single mom of color was urgently communicating to the receptionist about a problem with her special needs son. And there was no computing and hearing her plea for help. And she was so frustrated, she said, just forget about it. And she stormed out. She went into a hallway and she was just weeping, gut-wrenching sobs. And I went over to her because I happened to be visiting the campus that day as an assistant superintendent. And I said, Mom, what's going on? Tell me what's wrong. And she said, they keep putting my son on the wrong bus. I'm a single mom, and if I have to keep coming up to this school, I'm going to lose my job, and then we're going to be homeless, and then what am I going to do? And I said, this is the last day that's going to happen. That's what we're going to do. And so you better believe on my watch, I made sure that mom was taken care of. But I couldn't help but wonder how many parents were having frustrating experiences like that, hitting a wall and having no idea of how to navigate the system. If she had been a high-paid lawyer, oh, I'm sure they would have been listening. And so we create systems where people lean in and hear and respond and not just react on what's convenient for that day. I also want to reference a colleague I adore, Dr. Julie Washington. And part of that doing with community is understanding how we're coming across as educators. She says we should not allow the prestige of the dialect impact our views of the people who speak them. How can we decide not to respect the scholar because we do not respect the dialect? I can code switch, friends. I'm an inner city girl from Detroit, and I will never forget where I came from, but I have the currency of the boardroom as well. And we want our children to have both. And I believe we need to have an asset-based mindset and respect the dialect that scholar is loved in, the language that scholar is loved in, and build upon that. And if we have that mindset, non-verbally, it will communicate to parents when they engage us in conversation, focused on what's best for their scholar. In a recently published article, I also really appreciated this quote. Reading depends on spoken language. For most children, the language they bring to school will support learning to read. Some children's language skills differ in important ways from the classroom language variety, and teachers rarely receive guidance on how to enhance literacy instruction to meet these children's needs. Now, not to overload teachers out there and leaders, when we get the science right in terms of what is proven, this is the next layer of implementation science that we need to lean into so that we can build upon the language variety children bring to the table. And you know, something we rarely do is close the perception gap between the children we're serving and what we as adults believe they're receiving. I had the opportunity when working nationally for Scholastic Achievement Partners to engage in the work of We surveys. And that allowed the survey of teachers, of families, of scholars, and of leaders. And what we found was when you focus on something like literacy, when you focus on something like engagement, student engagement, there is a perception gap between what the adults think is happening and what the students are experiencing. One of the most important ahas for me in helping to interpret these We surveys was, at times students were saying, you think you're being rigorous and engaging in instruction, but there's so much more you could be giving me. And so I want to encourage you to research surveys that allow you to get that student voice. Also creatively, I've seen superintendents have student councils to give them the pulse of what students are saying about their lived experience in schools. So this multifaceted approach should not leave out the most important consumer of their own learning, our students. You know, I want to look back and look forward for just a moment. I think about the shoulders I stand on. And I think about Frederick Douglass, who talked about how it is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men and broken women and broken people. Our work builds people and it builds the family tree. When we think about the bitter fruit of what we are tasting today, it goes back to the 1830s when anti-literacy laws existed that made it illegal to teach Black people to read. It goes back to desegregation, where separate but equal was a lie. And it also goes back to Brown versus Board that had some bias built in that Black teachers were the problem when Black teachers were doing a great job in the desegregated nature of this country teaching scholars. The problem and the opportunity is building teacher knowledge. Again, regardless of the people group our teachers come from. One of the things I learned as a teacher is our scholars can smell fake a mile away, and they know the teachers who love them enough to have the compassion for their circumstances, but they will not let go of high expectations. I remember teaching in a bedroom community here in the Houston area, and teachers saying, you know, this student is telling me I'm racist because I'm demanding high outcomes for them. And I said, let them know that I will not lower my bar for you. You can call me racist, but I love you enough to demand more of you. What is racist and classist is low expectations and continuing with the old when it is not serving children well. Now, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. You're always going to run into people who are the buzzards. They are picking at things that aren't even alive. They're not vibrant. They're not feeding anybody or anything. It's just comfortable. Don't hang out with the buzzards. You're going to have the crows who are cawing from the cheap seats, but they're not in the mix of with the real work. They're not engaging in productive ways, the people who are in the real work. Those aren't the ones to hang out with. Then you have your eagles. And eagles are people who take the time on a Saturday morning to come together and learn together about what we can do, should do, and will do on our watch. So my question to you as you prepare to take your takeaways today, what is your commitment and promise to yourself that on your watch will change, that is proven, that is deliverable to our scholars? If you are a legislator, what will you do on your watch? And it's not about our legacy. Our children are our legacy. Their future is our legacy. That is what matters. Our common enemy is not the researcher on the other side of Twitter. It is illiteracy. It is poverty. It is ignorance. It is vitriol and adult hubris and pride. Those are our enemies. Let's focus on those enemies, the barriers to teachers and leaders being clear on what we need to know and need to do for children. Because here's the thing that happens, and I love this research from the Brookings Institute. It is solid because what it shows is regardless of zip code, when you're poor in terms of kinder readiness, when we think about early childhood and laying that firm foundation, coming to school, as you can see on this y-axis, kinder ready is greatly influenced by zip code. And this is what we're overcoming. If we have moderate to high income, children come to school more ready to learn in general. But what is interesting, we look at this based upon income, the likeliness of coming to school, ready to learn, kinder ready, higher for Black students, Hispanic students, a mother with less than a high school diploma, with a high school diploma. But here's the big differentiator. When that mother earns a bachelor's degree, oh my goodness, it is a game changer. Think about the critical mass of women out there. When we close literacy gaps and they become fully literate, they have that opportunity to translate that literacy privilege for a lifetime, generation to generation. And so being married, not married, etc., not the big game changer. And even preschools are very zip code grounded. And so if I'm in a preschool desert, or I'm in a preschool that's struggling in terms of being able to just stay alive, my experiences are going to be very different than a bedroom community where people have a lot of income. And so really it is about the adults. It's not just the students. It's wrapping our arms around the family unit in terms of engagement opportunities. So do we repurpose the school for GED opportunities at night, for adult literacy at night? This is where we get very creative and think outside of the box and not just accept where we've always been. I want to end with this story. Actually, I want to end with two. So this gentleman is someone I'm so very proud of. His name is Sherman Hatton. And Sherman was a high school English student of mine in a bedroom community, so brilliant. And I was just enthralled by how deep his thinking was, and he loved my English class. And of course, when your students love you, your class and your teaching, you just can't help but love them back. But he is just a remarkable individual. Well, when we finished his 10th grade year together, I said, Sherman, you should be in AP classes, you should be in advanced level English. I said, and I'm going to make sure you end up there. And he said, no, Mrs. Wheaton. He said, I'm playing football. I don't want to work that hard. I said, I'm sorry, this is not a conversation and a discussion. So sure enough, I went to his counselor, got him set up. His coach tried to get him removed. He let me know later, but didn't happen. So he ended up being a class officer, just soaring. He also ended up teaching for 5 years. And after teaching for 5 years, he realized he wanted to have a deeper systemic impact. So Sherman ended up cashing out his school retirement and going to law school. And when he went to law school, he ran into Professor Larry Wheaton. So he has a conversation with my ex about me. He walked up to him, he said, are you Tracy Wheaton's husband? He said, yes, who are you? And he said, I'm Sherman Hatton, I'm going to take your class because I am going to be a lawyer. Now I used to tease Sherman, but I was serious. I said, you know what? You're going to be a lawyer one day. And he'd say, why do you say that about me? I say, because you're always arguing with me and you support your arguments with evidence. That's what great lawyers do. You're a phenomenal writer. You can do that. Well, sure enough, full circle, not only is he a lawyer, he is a judge, and he is extremely concerned about adjudicated youth and making a difference there, because he recognizes as a judge, as a former teacher, and as my former student, that through line from functional illiteracy and the school to prison pipeline. So not only does Houston have a problem with a solution, Tennessee, this nation, and this world have a challenge in work clothes and an opportunity by applying what we know for sure will make a difference for every child, whether they be in a first instruction setting, regardless of zip code, whether they be in a special education classroom or in need of dyslexia therapy. Every child deserves that chance. So I want to end by asking you to call on the stakeholders who are about the right work and the real work reach out to me if I can be of service to you. Because it comes down to this, we have two choices. We can operate based upon fear, and this acronym I hope you take with you if you've never heard it before. Fear is false evidence appearing real. It's false evidence appearing real. And I want you to ask yourself, if I were not afraid, what would I do? We can choose to operate based upon faith. Those of you who walk by faith are those focused adults intervening tenaciously with hope. That is the fuel in our tank. And the way we keep that hope living and breathing in our neck of the woods is by showing people better than we can tell them that this works. Your lighthouse effect will make a difference. It will inspire. It will make a difference. I remember having a visit from a superintendent who flew with his leadership team to the Houston area to see one of our lighthouse campuses that was improvement required for years and going to be taken over by the state. And they are now a five-star school serving EL learners. This group came in to find out how to help a school that majority African American, same circumstance, but different student population. Well, when the teachers and the leaders flew in to see the work, they said, we've got to do this. They were able to backload from a mental model of what it could be. And sure enough, within a year, they had gone from the 8th lowest performing school in the state and the lowest performing in that district to the top tier in performance. They just needed to know what the right work was and have the coaching and support for everyone on that staff to make a difference. I want to thank you for your service. And if you don't hear it from anyone else, I am saying thank you for being those change agents who transform the family tree through literacy by translating science to practice for every scholar in every school, regardless of zip code.